Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 262 of War and Peace. Chapter 262. 9 days after the abandonment of Moscow, a messenger from Kutuzov reached Petersburg with the official announcement of that event. This messenger was Michaud, a Frenchman who did not know Russian, but who was, although foreign, Russian of heart and soul. The emperor at once received this messenger in his study at the palace on Stone Island. Michaud, who had never seen Moscow before the campaign, and who did not know Russian, yet felt deeply moved, as he wrote, when he appeared before our most gracious sovereign with the news of the burning of Moscow, whose flames lit the way. Though the source of Michaud's chagrin must have been different from that which caused Russians to grieve, he had such a sad face when shown into the emperor's study, that the latter at once asked, "Have you brought me sad news, Colonel?" "Very sad, sire," replied Michaud, lowering his eyes with a sigh. "The abandonment of Moscow." "Have they surrendered my ancient capital without a battle?" asked the emperor quickly, his face suddenly flushing. Michaud respectfully delivered the message Kutuzov had entrusted to him, which was that it had been impossible to fight before Moscow, and that as the only remaining choice was between losing the army as well as Moscow, or losing Moscow alone, the field marshal had to choose the latter. The emperor listened in silence, not looking at Michaud. "Has the enemy entered the city?" he asked. "Yes, sire, and Moscow is now in ashes. I left it all in flames," replied Michaud in a decided tone, but glancing at the emperor, he was frightened by what he had done. The emperor began to breathe heavily and rapidly. His lower lip trembled, and tears instantly appeared in his fine blue eyes. But this lasted only a moment. He suddenly frowned, as if blaming himself for his weakness, and raising his head, addressed Michaud in a firm voice. "I see, Colonel, from all that is happening, that Providence requires great sacrifices for us. I am ready to submit myself in all things to His will. But tell me, Michaud, how did you leave the army when it saw my ancient capital abandoned without a battle? Did you not notice discouragement?" Seeing that his most gracious ruler was calm once more, Michaud also grew calm, but was not immediately ready to reply to the emperor's direct and relevant question, which required a direct answer. "Sire, will you allow me to speak frankly as befits a loyal soldier?" he asked to gain time. "Colonel, I always require it," replied the emperor. "Conceal nothing from me. I wish to know absolutely how things are." "Sire," said Michaud with a subtle, scarcely perceptible smile on his lips, having now prepared a well-phrased reply. "Sire, I left the whole army, from its chiefs to the lowest soldier, without exception, in desperate and agonized terror." "How is that?" the emperor interrupted him, frowning sternly. "Would misfortune make my Russians lose heart? Never." Michaud had only waited for this to bring out the phrase he had prepared. "Sire," he said, with respectful playfulness, "they are only afraid lest your majesty, in the goodness of his heart, should allow yourself to be persuaded to make peace. They are burning for the combat," declared this representative of the Russian nation,
and to prove to your majesty by the sacrifice of their lives how devoted they are." "Ah," said the emperor, reassured, and with the kindly gleam in his eyes, he patted Mashhad on the shoulder. "You set me at ease, Colonel." He bent his head and was silent for some time. "Well then, go back to the army," he said, drawing himself up to his full height, and addressing Mashhad with a gracious and majestic gesture. "And tell our brave men, and all my good subjects, wherever you go, that when I have not a soldier left, I shall put myself at the head of my beloved nobility, and my good peasants, and so use the last resources of my empire. It still offers me more than my enemies suppose," said the emperor, growing more and more animated. "But should it ever be ordained by divine providence," he continued, raising to heaven his fine eyes shining with emotion, "that my dynasty should cease to reign on the throne of my ancestors, then after exhausting all the means at my command, I shall let my beard grow to here," he pointed halfway down his chest, "and then go and eat potatoes with the meanest of my peasants, rather than sign the disgrace of my country and of my beloved people whose sacrifices I know how to appreciate." Having uttered these words in an agitated voice, the emperor suddenly turned away, as if to hide from Mashhad the tears that rose to his eyes, and went to the further end of his study. Having stood there a few moments, he rode back to Mashhad and pressed his arm below the elbow with a vigorous movement. The emperor's mild and handsome face was flushed, and his eyes gleamed with resolution and anger. "Colonel Mashhad, do not forget what I say to you here. Perhaps we may recall it with pleasure some day, Napoleon or I," said the emperor, touching his breast. "We can no longer both reign together. I have learned to know him, and he will not deceive me any more." And the emperor paused with a frown. When he heard these words and saw the expression of firm resolution in the emperor's eyes, Mashhad, at that solemn moment, felt himself enraptured by all that he had heard, as he used afterward to say, and gave expression to his own feelings and those of the Russian people whose representative he considered himself to be, in the following words. "Sire," said he, "your majesty is at this moment signing the glory of the nation and the salvation of Europe." With an inclination of the head, the emperor dismissed him. All right, so that concludes my reading of chapter 262 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, day 262. Les décrets de la divine providence. "He who lives to see 2 or 3 generations," Schopenhauer writes, "is like a man who sits some time in the conjurer's booth at a fair, and witnesses the performance twice or thrice in succession." Imagine a Russian woman foredoomed by absurd longevity, and worse, cursed with clear understanding throughout it all. What a conjure show she'd enjoy. Late in her life, she'd watch Stalin's utopian agricultural experiments in Ukraine mutate into first famine, and then a war on the peasantry. Just about that time, the Nazis would show up with the intent of establishing a Lieberstrom in the same region, so of course they'd need to confiscate the produce of the land, whatever was left after Comrade Stalin's genius ideas anyway, and redistribute it to the good German Volk. Our imaginary friend might then compare these depredations to an earlier time in her life, when another Western power, this time France, invaded Russia. There, too, many were slaughtered and suffered egregiously. What conclusion to draw after witness to such a life, other than to find oneself in total agreement with Robert Browning, who once poetried, "Manifold are thy shapings, Providence. Many a hopeless matter God's arrange." Emperor Alexander, himself witness to the French invasion of Russia, is all too familiar with the many shapings of Providence. In fact, he speaks of the harsh vagaries of Providence twice in today's chapter, after he is given news of Moscow's abandonment and burning. He tells the bearer of this bad news that Providence requires great sacrifice, and that if the sacrifice entails suffering with the people he rules, then so be it. It's an admirable response to hardship. He says he will exhaust all the means under his command to stop Napoleon's aggressions, but should that fail, he'll endure what providence supplies him. What he doesn't do is give up. Instead, he'll wrestle with fate to the best of his abilities. It's almost as if Emperor Alexander is familiar with Epictetus' teaching, and one of our previous meditations, that difficulties are like a wrestling partner whose assaults are a means for us to strengthen our own defenses. That's a lesson for everyone, emperors and hypothetical Russian ladies alike. Daily meditation. The art of life is more like the wrestler's art than the dancer's. In respect of this, that it should stand ready and firm to meet onsets which are sudden and unexpected. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. All right, so that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 262 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron on patreon.com, or making a one-time donation to PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. Tomorrow we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 263. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.